I give away free Steam games with every major video I do, and here's who won this week. The games available to receive are listed below. To enter, just leave a comment and have contact information on your profile. And now, on with the video. I'm playing something almost every week, and sometimes I want to talk about it and give you a vertical slice. So stick with me for some lightning reviews. This week, on the chopping block. This week I've been playing Hot Wheels Unleashed 2 Turbocharged, which has a lot to live up to. The first Hot Wheels Unleashed, if I were to do annual accolades, probably would have been a contender for my Game of the Year in 2021. It even clawed its way into my top 25 favorite games ever. On that note, if you'd be all for me doing annual awards or ranking of games I've covered, then let me know. Hot Wheels Unleashed 1 was a straightforward and narrowly focused but mechanically solid arcade racer. A somewhat steady trickle of bonus content in the form of cars, racing environments, and a theoretically infinite stream of user-created tracks and multiplayer kept me coming back over and over to the point where I got skilled enough to being fairly absurd in my ability to break some tracks and resulted in me getting all achievements twice over. Once on PlayStation, and again on Steam. Now, longtime viewers will recall that I don't tend to pay much attention to pre-rendered trailers, but I looked to the one for Unleashed 2 and saw that they were allegedly planning on increasing the kinds of vehicles to pick, as well as adding a jump thruster mechanic, which perked my interest at the possibilities if people continued to make tracks with no checkpoints. Oh, and Hasbro, please don't claim my video for the use of limited clips from the trailer. It's fair use, and you could do with not being a corporate dick blister for a day, hugs and kisses, but I digress. So, having now mainlined Hot Wheels Unleashed 2 for a few days, what can I say about it? Well, for starters, while subtly tweaked, the racing physics from the first Unleashed are largely unchanged and immediately familiar to anyone that's put in hours on the first game. Cars all have distinctive feels with how they handle, but one of the first major changes I came to terms with in Unleashed 2 is now that there's a wide array of vehicle classes with different behavioral characteristics. One of the easiest to explain is the off-road class. In the first Unleashed, all surfaces that your vehicle raced across handled pretty much the same, but in Unleashed 2, your car may behave differently depending on where on a track you're driving. Off-road class vehicles handle the most consistently between varying surfaces, while balanced or swift class vehicles might struggle on dirt, grass, or carpet. The class of vehicle is also good to keep in mind for the types of events that you decide to participate in. Drift class obviously excels in events where you navigate a course trying to negotiate turns as stylishly as possible, whereas rocket class are good for time trials and general speed. What if you want to knock your opponents around and disrupt other racers for an eliminator event? Well, the heavyweight class might be more your taste. Speaking of throwing your weight around, Unleashed 2 has expanded the capabilities of racers overall by including a boost mechanic other than the traditional nitro speed boost that returns from the first game. Now, depending on your button press, you can either thrust yourself sideways to knock into an opponent, or you could activate the earlier speculated vertical jump thruster. The jump is actually essential depending on the course, because while tracks might have previously been oriented so that your vehicle will catch air and have a safe landing area, now you may encounter a course that has a gap at the exact same elevation as the portion where your wheels would leave the road, or maybe there's an obstacle that has been placed to disrupt your forward momentum unless you hop over it. It took a hot minute for my brain to connect the necessary gears properly for me to instinctively start hopping over certain portions of track, but once I made the connection, it just added to the depth of fun that I was going to be having, and brought back fond memories of Speed Racer on the PS2, a tremendously underrated racing game in my opinion, but I digress. Now, as I speculated before, I saw the hop mechanic as being exploitable to break the game in new and fascinating ways, but the tracks included with the base package game have been far more intelligently crafted this time around, preventing the easily exploitable and abundant shortcuts that made the first game unwelcoming to newcomers on the multiplayer aspect. In fact, the jump mechanic seems to be thoroughly thought out, with a bit of an emphasis on dragging you back down to solid earth after you theoretically negotiated whatever obstacle may have prompted your jump in the first place. I tried experimenting with maintaining my height and pointing my vehicle skywards as I thrusted, but as I said, the jump seems to have been designed to keep itself from being exploited too heavily. That being said, if you can find a natural feature of the track to jump off of, you can pretty much get your car to fly as you would have been able to do in the first game. That being said, shortcuts and tracks are now much more deliberate and subtle. Having stampeded through the main campaign, I felt a lack of challenge in normal difficulty, but then I started to encounter the endgame time trials. Holy crap, these put me right back in my place. Not only did I have to hone my driving skills to maintain the perfect line, and anticipate all the hazards to utilize my boost with the utmost efficiency, but indeed you have to find shortcuts in order to beat some of these races against the clock, which requires abstract thinking and a heightened ability to break down environments and checkpoints in a way that will tremendously benefit you in multiplayer. This also means you have to find a small handful of cars that you can push to their absolute limits or that matches your tendencies and playstyle. Expanding the depth of ways to control your car even further, now when you upgrade your car, in addition to just stats that boost, you can incorporate certain characteristics in how your vehicle handles, or make strategic decisions in how much boost you want to acquire versus how much immediate benefit you'll see on the track. Of course, some of the upgrades are just a straight up better decision to have, such as the immunity to track hazards. Speaking of track hazards, I suppose that's a good way to jump into the story. Yes, Hot Wheels Unleashed 2 actually has a story campaign this time around, although, speaking quite frankly, there might as well not be. If you recall my review from the first Unleashed in 2021, I stated that I appreciate any attempt at a story campaign when it's well done. But this one is quite frankly not. Through some fantastical scientific mucking around, a lab created a device that can expand or shrink items and in the process hit some Hot Wheels track monster toys and made them giant, and now they're rampaging around the city. And in order to subdue them, you have to temporarily shrink them back down to their original size, along with shrinking the characters you're racing as and then navigating a course while hitting targets that theoretically represent the health of the monsters. Given the target age that some of this stuff might be aiming for, I can see why they made some of the decisions that they did, but the writing for these characters is atrocious, and resulted in me skipping cutscenes whenever I could and hoping to see the characters on screen winding up in a 6-car pileup. Actually, speaking of the characters on screen, that led to a nitpick. The Hot Wheels models you can race as are no longer limited to just cars and trucks, but quads and motorcycles too. But if I'm being honest, it felt weird piloting these just as raw vehicles, especially if you were to go into a boss level where you theoretically drove as one of the aforementioned protagonists, only for the actual gameplay to feature a die-cast vehicle with no trace of a human avatar in sight. It could have been incorporated as a static plastic model, but at least it would have been something. Heck, you could have had the player customize a model to put in a vehicle or just add a bit of immersion or personalization, which I suppose allows me to transition to the livery editor, which has transitioned over from the first game. Between the track editor and the livery maker, there's been a bunch of quality of life improvements that make general use a fair degree easier. For one, the ability to generate stickers and be able to save them and utilize them on the design's whole cloth was such a relief to see implemented that I actually started making my own stuff a lot sooner than I would have done so previously. The track editor also incorporates every obstacle that was presented in the first game, for better or for worse, but also adds a whole mess of new obstacles and features that you can add to a track. I was genuinely impressed with the creativity that the community generated with the first Hot Wheels Unleashed, and seeing the tools and options added that widely expand what's possible makes me genuinely interested in what the community will create in future. Unfortunately, just as other players can make new interesting or incredible feats of track design, there's also a whole mess of individuals that cobble random elements together with zero thought and throw them out into the world to inflict pain on other racers. Which leads me to a direct request from Milestone. I understand the endeavor to try and build people up, but just as much as you have a vote up or favoriting system for tracks, you need to have another option to vote down or condemn to the lowest pits of hell. Also, why the did you take away the unicorn head for an icon on the profile customization options? Finally, do you recall how the last game had a means to unlock cars through a pseudo loot box system that could have been, but fortunately didn't go for an extremely exploitative monetization system? Well, they didn't do the loot box system, but instead had a roulette wheel that you could earn spins for a chance to win items. At the time of writing, there's no way to feed money into the system and can only be used by playing the game, but I would really like Milestone to stop using systems that trigger the same psychological tactics and methods as gambling, even if there's no way to input money. Hot Wheels Unleashed 2 Turbocharged may not necessarily be reinventing the wheel, but it's widely expanded from the narrow scope that the first game introduced and improving in almost every element. While this arcade racing game may not be all that complex, the subtle depth it presents make for a game that I'm just as likely to sink hundreds of hours into, just like the first one. On the day I composed this script, the one day I have off this week, I spent 6 hours straight racing and had to almost yell at myself to get me to stop. Take that for what you will. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some fools to stomp online. Hey, look at that, it's the end of the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember that commenting can actually win you a free prize. So until next time, this is Gheeotine saying thanks for watching and keep your head on your shoulders.